welcome. Welcome to Daf Yomi Week in Review, pre-Pesach edition. I'm Rachel Scheinerman, editor of My Jewish Learning, and it's always my pleasure to host these classes and learn from all the wonderful teachers we have this morning. Well, morning for me anyway, it might not be morning for you. But in any case, right now we are joined by Rabbi Ari Sachs. Go ahead, Rabbi Sachs.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. So glad to be able to be here today and to engage with you in, I don't know if whatever all the different positions and that you are in your life, or professions, I should say, but that this hopefully will be of interest for anyone who wanted to be an econ major or as economics professor, or anybody involved on Wall Street or anything having to do with money, because I like to call today's topic Talmudic Econ 101. Talmudic Econ 101. Because if we think about this section of the Talmud in Bava Metzia from Dapim 44 through 50, today is officially for Bava Metzia 50. It's the end of chapter 3 and the beginning of chapter 4. We get a lot of the basics that any econ class would talk about in terms of what is money, why is money valuable, and how can you create a society that is stable with money as a guide for exchanging one kind of good for another good. Because the basic idea of economics is that there are items that people consider to be valuable, and I don't necessarily have everything that I would want. However, I have something that maybe somebody else would want. And what I can do is to barter those different things together so that I receive something and you receive something that is both valuable to both of us. And so that's how we can do it on an individual basis. But I don't think it takes much of an imagination to say how that might be difficult on a much larger scale. So how do you build a society that is able to effectively engage in the transfer of valuable goods from one individual or one party to the other that is not oppressive, that is stable, and that is fair? So, and by the way, oppression and fair are actually, I think, different ideas that we're going to actually touch on a little bit. And all of these different notions of what's fair, of what is not oppressive, and also of what's stable, those are issues that still appear today in our own world. And so I hope that this learning may be of value for us all in thinking about issues surrounding the transfer of how we deal with money in our current society. So with that in mind, you do have a source sheet that was shared in the chat. I will also be sharing it on my screen in a moment. But just to kind of give a little bit of overview of everything having to do in this section of this part of Bava Metzia. We end with chapter 3 when it talks about matters of trespass. If you lose some goods, such as barrels of wine, do you have to exchange it for? Do you have to repay it with the same barrels or different kind of barrels? How would you want to do that? And then when we get into the beginning of chapter 4, this is when we get to the core, or I should say not the core, but it gets to the essence of how is it that we exchange goods. So the first important point to say here is, how do I know that when I am giving you something that you are going to give it back to me, give what's owed, give what I'm paying for? Are you going to give me what I need in exchange for that? If you've ever seen any of those, whether it's a spy movie, mafia movies, or so, where you have these two groups of people armed to the teeth with guns and have their briefcases. One has like lots of money, the other has this valuable good, and they're saying, I want to see it first. No, I want to see that good first. No, I want to see it first. That, right? How do you know it's actually going to work? How do you know that transaction, the other person's not going to, let's just say, do the wrong thing? So the first important point is this. In general, in any transaction, you have a commodity and you have currency. A commodity is something of value that could theoretically change in value at different points, but for me, it's worth a certain amount of money at a certain time. And then for you, and then if let's say I want that commodity, so what I would do is I would give you currency. I would give you something that has a stable value. That's the definition of currency here. And by virtue of giving you that currency, you are going to give me this commodity. So the first important thing is to know this. In order for a transaction to occur, you must take the commodity that enacts the transaction, not the giving of currency. That is to say, if I give you money to give me something, then that does not actually affect the transaction. Why? Because if you are holding on to the commodity and then I give you the money, I might say, you know what? I actually think this is worth more than that. Or you know what? I don't actually want to sell it to you. So by virtue of the money, not the currency, not being the thing that enacts the transaction, it allows for the person who has the commodity, who has the valuable item, to say, you know what? I don't want to do it. I'm going to take it back. Now, what you have to do then is you have to give back the currency. You don't just hold on to it. You don't just take it. But it's the idea that by pulling, and that's the language used in the Gemara, by pulling in the commodity, by taking it, that is the sign that the transaction is enacted. One of the ways in which we see this in our rituals is if you ever go to a Jewish wedding, and if you see at the very beginning of a wedding ceremony that the rabbi who finishes the writing of the ketubah has to draw a little bit of a line. And then by virtue of writing on the ketubah, it's a sign that this is mine as a rabbi. This is my ketubah. And I want to give it to the groom in order for the groom to be able to say it's now in his possession. I have to hold up either the ketubah or a little handkerchief, and they have to grab it from my hand. They're pulling it into them. That is the sign of the transaction. And then underneath the chuppah, when the groom has it and has to physically give it over to the bride has to take it, and therefore the ketubah is now in her possession and it belongs to her. So it's the act of pulling in. Now, by the way, if you think about that also act of pulling in, it's also kind of like a power move. It's saying this belongs to me. So if you go for a handshake with someone and you pull their hand in, you're kind of saying, I own you. I am the one who is taking control of you in this particular moment. So it's also the way in which we kind of describe that kind of relationship between one another. So that's the first thing. Transactions occur by pulling in. The other important reason why it's important to consider the issues surrounding how a transaction occurs is because then the question is, well, what is currency that is actually valuable? Or I should put it another way, how do I determine what the correct form of currency actually is? And the reason why that's important is because when we think about what things are valuable as currency, we have money, right? Money is just printed paper or minted coins. And you've seen all those, if you've seen like a post-apocalyptic world where that money is no longer valuable because there's no actual government to stand behind it. People just use it as fire or use it for fire starters. That is to say, what we consider to be valuable as currency now may not necessarily always have been. And that is a very important thing in regards to understanding what is considered to be what money is, as well as what is not money. Or to put another way, what is currency, what is valuable, and what is a commodity that can change in value depending upon how we view it. So this is where we're going to get to one of the pieces of text that you're going to see on your screen. All right. And we're actually going to go to, this is the second text. It's how is money valuable? Sorry, I'm going to do it over here. All right. It was stated that there is a dispute between Rav and Levi. One said money can be an item used to effect exchange. Now, when it says money here, it doesn't just mean money in general. The Hebrew is matbea. Matbea. That's important because matbea does not mean money. Matbea means an imprint. Matbea means an imprint. Earlier in our on our dapim, it talked about gold and silver. Gold as zahav and silver as kesef. By the way, in modern Hebrew, how do you say money? You say kesef. But kesef is actually silver. And the reason why kesef is used to be described as money is because in the Gemara, it actually says that kesef is considered to be currency when you are buying the commodity of zahav, of gold. So if you think about the bricks of gold that some people say, oh, I only, if in a bad market, I'm only going to take the gold because the gold is stable. It's not that the gold is stable. It's that gold is considered to be a commodity that people will always want and that it doesn't depend on other factors. So the silver, the kesef, is considered to be the currency, which is a little bit less valuable in many ways. That currency is less valuable in and of itself than the commodity in which you are buying for that currency. And so then there's a question as to, well, what is the right formulation so that silver can be currency to buy gold, but gold cannot be currency to buy silver. Copper can be currency to buy silver because copper is less than silver, but silver cannot be considered to be able to buy copper. So if you talk about the value of these different kind of metals, you get into a whole issue surrounding, well, which one's considered to be currency and which one's considered to be a commodity. And it wasn't until silver, especially because it was more easily able to be done against silver, although gold you can and copper you can, but silver was used as the primary metal that was imprinted in some way. And that imprint is basically the beginning of having a currency that is widely used. Who is the one to make that kind of currency? Who is the one to actually make that imprint is important for considering the value of that particular coin, of that particular silver. So as an example, oh, that's not what I want to come up here. That this particular coin, if you can see it on the screen, which was taken from the Bar Kokhba revolt that was discovered in the Judean desert, that this was a coin that was used for two purposes. One, it was used by the folks in doing the Bar Kokhba revolt against the Romans as a sign that we are building our own society. Because one of the things of a society is that we have to exchange goods, so we're going to have coins to be able to do that. But in addition, it has it all what you also have it on those imprints are the signs of the success, of the value, and of the importance of the regime of the government that is making those coins, so that it's a way to spread the message that this is that this is a government, that this is a country that is important. It spreads that branding, that messaging that's critical. And so the only way that currency can actually be considered to be valuable is if you trust the source that makes it, if you trust the government that stands behind it. Therefore, money can be, coming back to our text, money meaning the imprints of silver coins that are created by certain kind of governments or certain kind of countries, those can be an item used to effect exchange because they're stable. And one said, money cannot be the item used to effect a transaction by means of exchange, as that form of transaction is effective only with regard to items such as produce and vessels. I think it's thinking more about if you're in the market or so. Rav Papa said, what is the reason for the opinion of the one who says that money cannot be the item used to effect a transaction by means of an exchange? It is because the mind of the one acquiring the coin is on the form minted on the coin, not on the value of the metal, that's kind of what we're talking about. If you want to be able to know that the currency that you are getting in exchange for this commodity is going to continue to be valuable, it's because you trust not the value of the metal, which can go up and down, but you trust the source of the imprint that this government is stable, which ironically is the reason why this particular rabbi does not actually believe that money can be used for these kinds of exchange, because as he says, and the value due to the form is apt to be canceled by the authorities. Therefore, in the eyes of the party acquiring it, the coin itself has no real value and therefore cannot be an item used to effect exchange. So one of the things that's also important thinking about Econ 101 is that if you want to have a society that is built on fairness, on not having on no oppression, and also on on ways being able to effectively exchange and for people to not have to worry about it, you have to believe that the government behind, the authorities behind that coin is stable, which is why, from a larger sense, if we think about economics, economics is also the principle that the society in which we are doing that exchange will continue to be here. It will not be disrupted. It will not be overthrown, that it is stable enough to exist so that the money that we receive for this valuable commodity that we're giving up is going to continue to be valuable. And the only way for it to continue to be valuable is if the authorities who make it continue to be in power. If you overthrow the government, all of that money that people have been saving is completely worthless. So that's the second point of Econ 101, of Talmudic Econ 101. Now, the next point is talking about fairness but also when we're looking at it in regards to fairness and oppression together. Now, I'm kind of separating fairness and oppression because fairness means that in one way in which we try to do these kinds of exchanges is that I believe that this money that I'm giving you is valuable and that the commodity I'm receiving is giving me a similar value as to the money I'm offering, and that we can both have that sort of agreement. Unfortunately, one of the ways in which we look at economics now is about winning and losing. Who are the winners and who are the losers? And the idea of winning is basically to say, let's get as much money as possible and let's be able to find our largest profit margins so that, and what is profit margin? It means that the base for how much we use to pay for a good is much, much lower than how much we're actually selling that good for. And what the Talmud says is that, in fact, that's a form of exploitation. And there's a certain limit to how much you should be able to buy or sell based upon the commodity that you are receiving. That's simply what is fair. So I'm now going to share my screen one more time. And here it is. All right, so this is from Bava Metzia 49b. And Shmuel says, when we say that there's a waiver or a nullification of the transaction, it is in a case where there is not a disparity of 1/6, which is deleka kiaminan mechila uvitul mikach heka deleka shtut mishnei tzedadim. Trying to think where this 1/6 exactly comes from. It must be from the deleka shtut. Shtut here must be the 1/6. That it is a disparity of 1/6 from both aspects, i.e., both in terms of the money paid and in the terms of the value of the item. But in a case where there is a disparity of 1/6 from one aspect, either in terms of the money paid or the value of the item, it is exploitation. So if you take a look at, let's say, a profit margin that is more than 600% of how much it was that they bought it for, and you say, wow, that's amazing, they did a great job. The Talmud is teaching us it's not that they did a great job, it's that they're taking advantage of the system, because the system is not designed for one party to have power over the other to determine what the market rate is by virtue of how much money they can make. Because again, the market is based upon how much we view the value of that commodity. And those values can skew for a variety of different reasons. And if you pay any attention to the stock market, I think you can understand how and why that happens. But the point here is that there should be an understanding that you cannot take advantage of the other person, that there must be a sense of fairness. And so the language that they're using is related to that idea of 1/6. I know we have a hand up. I want to finish up with one more thing, and then there may be time for a couple of questions if you'd like. But it's not just about that sense of oppression of related to just being fair. It's then also thinking about, well, as an entire system, as a whole, how do we deal with issues related to debts and forgiveness and loans, which is again also popping up in the news and popping up in a way saying, is it fair to cancel loans for folks who took them out? Here is what our Talmudic text teaches us a little bit about that idea related to loans. What is the meaning of the statement? The sabbatical year does not abrogate the loan that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is saying. It is referring to that half of the loan that he took on the basis of collateral. Meaning, if you already put up some money regarding like collateral is a certain equal amount to whatever that loan is, but that's only half of that loan, that the sabbatical does not come to cancel what you've already done. The Gemara asks, then why does he need the collateral that he is holding? The Gemara answers, he requires it as a mere reminder to increase the likelihood that the loan will be repaid, and it does not prevent cancellation of a loan. Well, let me put it to you this way. When you put up collateral, it doesn't mean that the person who takes that collateral, who says, if you say, I'm going to get a loan and then as collateral, you will hold my house, it doesn't mean that you're actually going to take control of my house. What it means is that it is going to lead me to try to do the best that I can to repay the loan by virtue of putting it up as collateral, but that the purpose of the sabbatical is that I do not have to pay back that loan if I cannot do so. And this comes back to another key part when it comes to economics. It isn't just about value of one thing over the other, because as we said, value depends upon a level of trust in the stability of a particular currency or a particular government, as an example. However, there is another way of thinking about trust, which is for people to do the right thing. And along those lines, when there is a time in which someone doesn't pay a debt or where there isn't a correct exchange, that the answer to that, according to the Talmud, in terms of Econ 101, is to bring a blessing or a curse, depending upon one's view of that moment. And that curse goes like this. May he who exacted payment from the people of the generation of the flood and from the people of the generation of the dispersion and from the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah and from the Egyptians in the Red Sea will in the future exact payment from whoever does not stand by their statement. I think it's a pretty strong language, but it's basically saying you got to have a moral conscience to do the right thing. the language that the text uses here is saying like bad things are going to happen to you, but it's more so having what's called Yirat Hashem, or that fear of God, that fear of doing the wrong thing, and that is a valuable religious goal to have. And that if you have that in your heart, then you will be able to do right when it comes to the way in which you do business with your friends and even with people who are not your friends, but people who you need to do business with. And I know that we have a question from Claudette, but I'll let up to Rachel in terms of how to handle questions.
Sure. Thank you, Rabbi Sachs. Claudette, go ahead and ask your question. Then we got one or two in the chat afterward.
Yeah. Good morning. Thank you. It's kind of strange and beautiful that we're studying this part of the Gemara today, because my question is, what do we do with the situation where when you go from one grocery to the next grocery for Pesach, and the same item is doubled or tripled at one place, and at the other place it is not, and it's all in the kosher section? I mean, like, why would a can of olive oil that was only $10 2 weeks ago now $30?
Right. So
at my grocery store, Claudette, you can buy a single box of matzah for like $5 or 5 boxes of matzah for $6.
Why is that happening?
Right.
We're studying that this is wrong, but now why is that?
So the idea of the fact that there are different prices is not necessarily wrong. It's a difference between currency versus a commodity. Meaning commodity, which is what Pesach food is, it's an item, it's a good, that can fluctuate in price for a variety of different reasons. And part of the issue around the exploitation piece and the notion, I think, of the 1/6, there's an idea of 1/6 or 1/60th. It's almost kind of like a number that's chosen to simply represent that it doesn't seem right, it doesn't seem fair. Now, if you talk to classical economists and they think about the morality of the market economy, what they would say is, well, yeah, you could charge exorbitant prices, but if no one's going to buy it for that, and therefore the price is going to get lower, and so the market will correct itself. That's the idea behind how the market will has certain safeguards against moral corruption. But what we know is that human beings can sometimes interfere with that kind of correction by not disclosing certain things, by forcing people to buy things in certain ways. So the difference, I think, in your case between the price of goods in one market to the other is more of a question of why is this commodity fluctuating in that way? And is it fluctuating because of the fact that commodities in general fluctuate? Or is there some other force like an owner or like whichever VOD was the ones responsible for making sure that those things were kosher, that they're going to a certain extreme, and therefore they're jacking up the prices in ways that are not considered to be fair? It's a fine line. It's not a perfect, you can't say that one is necessarily just exploitation versus just the market fluctuating. Both of those appear in our text for today. But what we have to do as human beings, I think this comes back to the last point about that curse, is we have to have a moral center. And that's the main thing. Have the moral center when you're dealing in business. Maybe they're not, maybe they are. I'm not sure.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's just,
no problem.
It's hard. Me.
Yeah, for sure.
It's very hard. Aaron Boxer has a good question here too, where he says, well, let's suppose that I'm a leather tanner and I develop a new system of tanning leather way cheaper, and now I can really undercut my competition.
Yeah. If you do it by 1/6, then that would be exploitation. Meaning if you undercut the market, because undercutting the market is another form of it. It's putting a lot of other folks out of business in that regard. Now, there are a variety of different reasons why you may want to make things cheaper overall. And I would say that, as an example, technology a lot of, if you think about the price of computers and how computers were so inefficient, like my cell phone has more computing power than Apollo 11, right? It just has more ability to do it. And part of that is just about the growth of technology, but it's also on the cost of goods to be able to make that technology work. So there is an idea that you're able to go cheaper, you're able to go lower. But the problem with that is if I develop a certain kind of product that is so under the market value for what that is, either there's exploitation around what is it that I'm doing that other people are not. For instance, there's a lot of talk around, let's say, an Amazon or others as wholesalers, that they force people to sell their goods at much lower prices. Otherwise, they don't give them access to their great marketplace. There are a lot of other forces that surround it. And by virtue of putting yourself on that level and making it so much cheaper, it will make it that much harder for more folks to be able to get the product overall, since you're going to put a lot of those competitors out of business.
Thank you. All right, we are at time. I usually allow myself a comment or two at the end. So I wanted to say one thing that you made me think of as I was learning from you today is I saw these rabbis being, we talked about how like currency with an imprint from an authority is that sort of gives it its value because of that authority, and that authority is usually the government. And what's interesting is I saw a lot of suspicion in the text about that government might not be around very long. And I think that's just so interesting because I sort of live in a world where I assume that my government, I live in the United States, I assume my government is going to be around for long. Like I'm not worried about that disappearing, but it does feel like the rabbis are maybe living in a different world where empires move in and out and governments are much less stable. And in fact, we might be hoping for the fall of the government, depending on how we feel about it a little bit, and back to, Jewish autonomy. So that was just a really interesting thing for me to think about. Okay, Andrew says he is worried that well, maybe you are. Maybe we should be. But that's for a different class. I will let you all worry about that on your own time. We'll stick with the Talmudic stuff here. Okay, so thank you, Rabbi Sachs, for Econ 101 Talmud style. Thank you to all of you for your really insightful comments and questions. I'm wishing you all a lovely Pesach. And we will see you next time, Chol Hamoed. It will be mid Pesach when we meet again.
All right. That was this in Pesach, everyone. Take care.
Bye, everyone.